The wheels of the black SUV sprayed gravel as it skidded to a halt outside Thornreed's modest ranch. The morning sun barely peeked over the horizon when Vivian Escher emerged, her designer boots out of place against the mud-splattered ground. Her perfectly tailored blazer couldn't hide the trembling in her shoulders as her eyes locked onto a black stallion in the distant corral. "That's my horse," she whispered, then louder, "That's my horse." The screen door creaked as Thorne stepped onto his weathered porch. His worn boots and faded jeans told the story of a man who worked the land, not someone who conquered boardrooms. He'd been expecting this moment since finding the injured stallion 3 days ago, though he hadn't expected its owner to be quite so commanding. "Ma'am," he started, but Vivian was already striding toward him, her grief and anger crackling in the morning air. "How dare you?" Her voice carried across the yard, sending birds scattering from the old oak tree. "Do you have any idea who I am? That horse belongs to the Escher estate." Thorne remained still, one hand resting on the porch railing. Just 3 nights ago he'd been making his final rounds during the storm when he'd found the magnificent black stallion, leg caught in loose barbed wire, rain plastering its coat to trembling muscles. "I know exactly who you are, Miss Escher," he replied, his voice steady as summer wind. "And I know that stallion was injured when I found him during Tuesday's storm. Couldn't leave him out there bleeding. You should have reported it immediately." She was closer now, close enough for him to see the red rim around her eyes, the slight smudge in her otherwise perfect makeup. "That horse is all I have left of," she caught herself, swallowing the words. The stallion nickered softly from the corral, drawing both their attention. The proud creature stood straighter now, its leg properly bandaged, though Thorne could still see the weariness in its eyes, the same weariness he recognized in Vivian Escher's gaze. "I tried calling the authorities," Thorne said quietly. "Storm knocked out the phones. By the time lines were back up, that leg needed immediate attention. Couldn't risk moving him." "You expect me to believe that?" Vivian's laugh was bitter as winter frost. A convenient story from a man who just happened to end up with one of the most valuable horses in the county. The accusation stung, but Thorne had weathered worse storms than a grieving woman's anger. He stepped down from the porch, movement slow and deliberate, just as he'd approached the injured stallion that night. "Miss Escher, I don't expect you to believe anything, but that horse needed help, and helping injured animals is what I do." He gestured to the small paddock behind his house where 3 rescued horses grazed peacefully. "You're welcome to call the vet who treated him. Doc Winters knows me, knows my work with rescue animals." Something flickered in Vivian's expression, doubt perhaps, or recognition. The stallion moved closer to the corral fence, its ears pricked forward, watching them both with intelligent eyes. "Finn never could gentle him," she said softly, almost to herself. "Spent months trying." Before she straightened, armor sliding back into place. "I'm calling the sheriff and my lawyers." "Do what you need to do," Thorne replied, turning toward the corral. "But that leg needs at least another week of care. You can have him checked by any vet you choose, but moving him now could undo all the healing." The morning breeze carried the scent of rain-washed earth and healing herbs from Thorne's small garden. Vivian stood frozen, caught between fury and something else, something that looked almost like hope, as she watched the stallion respond to Thorne's quiet presence. "How?" she started, then steeled herself. "How did you get him to trust you?" Thorne reached the fence, and the stallion, the horse that had thrown every trainer Vivian had hired, stepped forward to nudge his shoulder. "Sometimes, Miss Escher," he said, running a gentle hand along the horse's neck, "trust isn't about power or control. It's about patience and understanding that everyone, even a wild stallion, carries wounds that need healing." The morning sun caught the tears she quickly blinked away, and for a moment, the impressive businesswoman fell away, leaving just a woman who had lost far more than just a horse. Dr. Lyra Winters pulled her dusty truck into Thorne's driveway just as the morning shadows began to stretch across the ranch. Vivian Escher stood with arms crossed, watching the veterinarian's every move like a hawk tracking its prey. The lawyer she called sat in his air-conditioned car, typing furiously on his phone. Lyra nodded, leading her to the corral. "Thanks for coming out again twice in 3 days." Lyra smiled, hefting her medical bag. "This must be the owner you mentioned." Vivian stepped forward, designer boots still immaculate despite the dusty ground. "Yes, and I want a complete examination, every scratch documented." The stallion stood in the corner of the corral, its black coat gleaming in the morning light. At their approach, its ears flicked forward, recognizing Thorne's steady footsteps. "Easy now, Shadow," Thorne murmured. The name had slipped out naturally, earned during those long nights of keeping watch over the injured horse. His name is Phantom, Vivian snapped, but her voice caught as the stallion walked straight to Thorn, pressing its proud head against his chest. Lyra whistled low. Well, that's something you don't see every day, especially not with this one, from what I've heard. The examination proceeded in tense silence. Lyra documented the healing gash on the stallion's leg, the precise stitches, the careful bandaging. Every touch was accompanied by Thorn's quiet presence, his hand steady on the horse's neck. The wire could have severed tendons if left much longer, Lyra finally said, straightening up. Whoever found him that night probably saved his life. And the care since then, she gestured to the clean, healing wound, that's expert work. Vivian's perfect composure cracked slightly. But how is this possible? He never, she stopped, pain flickering across her face. He never let anyone this close, not since Finn. Thorn kept his eyes on the stallion, giving Vivian a moment to collect herself. Sometimes animals recognize something in us, he said quietly. Something that matches their own experience. The lawyer cleared his throat from the fence. Ms. Escher, if you'd like to proceed with charges. No, Vivian's voice was sharp. She took a deep breath, studying Thorn with new eyes. No charges. But I want to know exactly what you did, how you managed this. Lyra packed up her equipment, sharing a knowing look with Thorn. She'd seen him work with wounded animals for years, watched him heal creatures others had given up on. It wasn't about doing anything, Thorn explained, running a gentle hand down the stallion's neck. That first night in the storm he was trapped, hurting. I just sat with him, let him know he wasn't alone. The stallion nickered softly and Vivian's hand flew to her throat. It was the same sound he used to make for Finn. When the rain let up enough to work on his leg, he let me help, Thorn continued. Been sleeping out here in the barn since then, making sure the wound stayed clean, watching for infection. You slept in the barn? Vivian's voice held a mix of disbelief and something else. Respect, maybe, or understanding. Healing takes time, Thorn said simply. And trust needs consistency, Lyra finished, loading her truck. Pausing beside Vivian, Lyra added, I've known Thorn 15 years, Ms. Escher. He's the one I call when I've got an animal too traumatized to treat. There's a reason for that. The lawyer's phone buzzed again, but Vivian waved him off. She approached the corral slowly, stopping several feet from where Thorn stood with the stallion. The horse's ears twitched in her direction, but it didn't pull away as it had so many times before. He was Finn's pride and joy, she said softly. Bought him straight from the wild, said they'd learn to trust each other. After the accident, her voice trailed off. Thorn didn't push, didn't offer empty comfort. He just stood quietly, one hand still resting on the stallion's neck, creating a bridge between past and present. The wound needs another week, Lyra called from her truck. After that, assuming no complications, he should be sound enough to move. Vivian nodded slowly, her business mask slipping back into place, but something had shifted, like morning fog burning away to reveal unexpected landscapes. I'll have my stable hands come for him next week, she said, then hesitated. Unless you'd be willing to help transition him back to the estate. The words seemed to surprise her as much as him. Clearly you understand him in a way, she gestured helplessly, in a way no one else has. The stallion pressed closer to Thorn as if sensing the weight of the moment. In its dark eyes, Thorn saw the same wary hope he recognized in Vivian's carefully composed features. I don't work for anyone, he said finally. But I work with horses. If that's what you're asking. A ghost of a smile touched Vivian's lips. That's what I'm asking. The Escher estate sprawled across 50 acres of California's finest wine country, its manicured gardens and pristine stables a stark contrast to Thorn's modest ranch. He guided his weathered pickup past the ornate gates, feeling as out of place as a wildflower in a greenhouse. Zeb, the elderly stable manager, waited at the entrance of the main barn, his weathered face brightening at the sight of Thorn's truck. Mr. Reed, Miss Escher said you'd be coming. She's in a board meeting, but she left instructions. Just here to look things over, Thorn interrupted gently, stepping down from his truck. Need to see where the stallion will be housed. The stable complex was a marvel of modern engineering disguised as rustic charm. Every detail spoke of wealth, the gleaming brass fixtures, the imported timber, the state-of-the-art ventilation system. But something felt off to Thorn's experienced eye. Beautiful facility, he remarked, running a hand along the pristine walls. How long have you worked here, Zeb? 23 years, Zeb replied, pride evident in his voice. Since before Miss Vivian was more than a teenager dreaming about horses. His expression clouded. Before Mr. Finn too. Thorn noticed the slight hesitation. Must have been hard losing him so suddenly. Zeb's eyes darted around the empty stable. Very hard. Miss Vivian, she was never the same. The whole estate changed after. He crossed himself quickly. But you don't want to hear old stories. This will be Phantom's stall. The stall was spacious, with rubber matting and automatic waterers, everything a horse could need, except the freedom a wild spirit craved. This won't work, Thorn said firmly. He needs more space, more connection to the outdoors. Is there a paddock with direct access? Zeb's face lit up. Ah, the old training yard behind the west barn. Mr. Finn used it before. He caught himself again. It's perfect, private, quiet, with both covered and open areas. They walked to the west barn, and Thorn immediately saw the potential. The space was less polished than the main stables, more functional. A large paddock connected to a simple shelter with rolling hills visible beyond the fence. This is it, Thorn nodded. But it'll need work. That shelter needs reinforcing and the fencing should be checked. I can help, Zeb offered eagerly. Like old times when Mr. Finn and I would work on projects together. The sound of heels on gravel interrupted them. Vivian approached, her business attire immaculate but her face showing signs of strain. I see you found the old training yard, she said, her voice carefully neutral. Finn loved it here, said it reminded him of real ranches, not this. She gestured vaguely at the manicured estate. It's the right spot, Thorn confirmed, but I have conditions. Vivian's eyebrow arched. Conditions. First, I work with the horse my way, no trainers, no interference. Second, I need full access day or night. And third, he met her gaze steadily, I want the truth about what happened to Finn. The color drained from Vivian's face. Zeb suddenly became very interested in examining the fence posts. That's not relevant, Vivian managed. It is to the horse, Thorn pressed. Animals remember trauma. If I'm going to help him, I need to understand what he's carrying. Vivian's professional mask slipped for a moment, revealing raw pain beneath. It was a riding accident. Finn was trying to gentle Phantom. Something spooked the horse, he fell, hit his head. Her voice caught. The police investigated. It was ruled accidental. But something in her tone made Thorn think she didn't quite believe it herself. All right, he said finally. I'll start tomorrow. The shelter needs work first. Zeb, you'll help. The stable manager nodded enthusiastically. Of course. I'll have my contractor, Vivian began. No, Thorn cut in. Zeb and I will do it. Horses know when a place is built with understanding. This needs to be real, not just pretty. Surprisingly, Vivian didn't argue. Instead, she studied him with those sharp green eyes that seemed to catch everything. You're not what I expected, Mr. Reed. Thorn, he corrected. And you're not quite what you pretend to be, Ms. Escher. A ghost of a smile touched her lips. Vivian, she conceded. Dinner is served in the main house at 7, if you'd like to discuss the details further. Thanks, but I've got animals to feed at home, he replied. But I could use some coffee if Zeb knows where to find it. Zeb beamed. The kitchen staff makes the best coffee in the valley. Come, come. As they walked toward the service entrance, Thorn noticed Nathan Escher watching from an upstairs window of the main house. The man's expression was unreadable, but something about his steady gaze made the hair on Thorn's neck rise. In the cozy warmth of the estate's kitchen, Zeb poured rich coffee into sturdy mugs. His earlier nervousness seemed to fade away from the main house. You're good with horses, the older man said quietly, like Mr. Finn was. He would have liked you. Tell me about him, Thorn suggested, sipping the excellent coffee. Zeb glanced at the door before speaking. He was different from the other men Miss Vivian knew. Real, you know? Understood horses, understood people. Was asking questions before the accident, about the estate's finances, about some missing wine shipments. He shrugged. But that's all past now. Or maybe, Thorn thought, watching a stable hand hurry past the window with an anxious glance toward the main house, it wasn't past at all. Maybe it was as present as the shadow he'd seen in Vivian's eyes when she spoke of accidents and investigations. But for now he had a shelter to rebuild and a wild spirit to heal. The rest would come in its own time, like storm clouds gathering on a distant horizon. Dawn painted the training yard in shades of gold as Thorn worked, his breath visible in the cool morning air. 3 days of repairs had transformed the space with Zeb's help, making the work go faster than expected. The old man's stories flowed as freely as his coffee, each one adding another piece to the puzzle of Finn's death. The sound of approaching hoofbeats made Thorn look up from the fence post he was setting. Vivian sat astride a gleaming bay mare, her riding clothes a far cry from her usual business attire. Something in Thorne's chest tightened at the sight of her looking so natural, so unguarded. "You're here early," she called, dismounting with practiced grace. "Best time to work," he replied, driving the post deeper. "Your brother's up early too. Seen him watching from the house every morning." A shadow crossed Vivian's face. "Nathan takes his role as CFO very seriously. He's probably just reviewing the renovation expenses." "Is that why he was going through the old stable records in the office last night?" Vivian's head snapped up. "How do you?" "Zeb forgot his phone in there. When I went to return it, I saw Nathan with a stack of files from around the time Finn died." The bay mare nudged Vivian's shoulder, sensing her tension. She stroked the horse's neck absently, a gesture so similar to how Finn had once handled the stallion that Thorne's throat tightened. "You're very observant, Mr. Reed," she said finally, her walls sliding back into place. "Thorne," he reminded her. "And you're avoiding the question." Before she could respond, the estate's groundskeeper, Pike, approached with an urgent expression. "Ms. Escher, there's a situation with the irrigation system in the North Vineyard." "I'll be right there." She turned back to Thorne. "The stallion arrives tomorrow. I trust you'll be ready?" He nodded, watching her lead the bay away. Once she was gone, he turned to Pike. "That irrigation system seems to have a lot of problems lately." The groundskeeper's weather-beaten face tightened. "Yeah, well, maybe if Mr. Nathan stopped changing the maintenance schedules without telling anyone?" He caught himself. "Not that it's my place to say." "How long you've been working here, Pike?" 25 years. Was here when Finn started coming around." He glanced over his shoulder. "Good man, Finn. Asked too many questions, though, about the maintenance schedules." Pike's laugh was bitter. "About everything. Wine shipments that didn't add up, equipment purchases for machines we never saw. He was an accountant before meeting Miss Vivian, you know. Had a nose for numbers that didn't match." A door slammed in the main house, making Pike jump. "I should go, but—" he hesitated. "Watch yourself, Mr. Reed. Some questions here ain't safe to ask." Thorne waited until Pike was out of sight before walking to the old shelter. Zeb had helped him clear it out yesterday, unearthing years of accumulated tack and equipment. In the back corner, beneath a tarp, they'd found Finn's old saddle. He ran his hands over the worn leather, noting the quality of the workmanship. The saddle was expensive but well used, the mark of a man who valued function over appearance. Something crinkled under his fingers. As he examined the pommel carefully, he worked a folded piece of paper from where it had been wedged into the leather. The note was written in a hurried hand. "Numbers don't lie. Someone's bleeding the estate dry. Think I know who. Meeting M tonight to confirm. Don't trust N." The rest was too water-damaged to read, but the date in the corner was clear: the night Finn died. "Finding everything you need?" Thorne managed not to startle at Nathan Escher's voice. He tucked the note into his pocket smoothly as he turned. "Just checking the tack we cleared out. Lot of good equipment here." Nathan stood in the doorway, his expensive suit incongruous against the rustic setting. His smile didn't reach his eyes. "Yes, my sister has expensive taste in her projects." "That why you've been watching me? Worried about the budget?" "I'm worried about my sister," Nathan replied smoothly. "She's been through a lot. Lost her fiancé, nearly lost the estate. She's vulnerable to people who might take advantage." The threat was clear beneath the polite words. Thorne met his gaze steadily. "Funny, she seems pretty capable to me. Running the whole operation while you handle the money." Something dangerous flickered in Nathan's eyes. "Yes, well, someone has to keep track of the finances. Speaking of which, I should go. Board meeting." He paused at the door. "Oh, and Mr. Reed, that saddle belonged to a dead man. Best leave the past where it lies." After Nathan left, Thorne examined the saddle more closely. The stitching around the pommel had been redone, he noticed now, not recently but sometime before the accident, as if someone had taken it apart and put it back together. A horse whinnied from the main stable and Thorne straightened. He had work to do before the stallion arrived tomorrow. But tonight, after everyone was gone, he and Zeb needed to have a long talk about what exactly happened the night Finn died. He glanced up at the main house where he could see Vivian in her office, phone pressed to her ear, gesturing animatedly. She looked tired, he thought, even from this distance. Tired and somehow lonely, surrounded by all this wealth and beauty. The note crinkled in his pocket, its partial warning echoing in his mind, "Don't trust N." Thunder rumbled in the distance, promising another storm, but this time Thorne had a feeling the real turbulence wasn't coming from the sky. The stallion's return to the estate hadn't gone as planned. Despite Thorn's careful preparation, the horse had grown agitated during transport, as if sensing some lingering darkness in the air. Now, as thunder rolled across the valley, the magnificent black stallion paced in the renovated shelter, his hooves striking an anxious rhythm against the fresh rubber matting. "He knows where he is," Vivian said softly, watching from the shelter entrance. "I thought bringing him home would help, but this stopped being home the day Finn died." Lightning illuminated the yard, followed by a deafening crack of thunder that made the shelter's timbers groan. The stallion reared, eyes rolling. Without thinking, Vivian stepped forward, directly into the horse's path. "Don't." Thorn moved instantly, pulling her back against his chest as the stallion's hooves slashed through the air where she'd stood. The force of his movement sent them both stumbling backward into the tack room, the door swinging shut behind them. For a moment they stood frozen, Thorn's arms still around her, their hearts racing in tandem. Vivian's hair smelled of lavender and rain, and something in Thorn's chest tightened painfully. "I'm sorry," she whispered, not moving away. "I thought, for a moment he looked just like the night Finn died." She stiffened in his arms, then slowly pulled away. The tack room was small, lit only by the emergency lantern on the wall. Rain drummed against the roof, creating a cocoon of sound around them. "How did you know?" Her voice was barely audible above the storm. "Zeb told me it was raining that night." Thorn kept his distance, giving her space in the confined room. Said the stallion was agitated then too, almost like he knew something was wrong. Vivian's laugh was bitter. "Wrong?" Everything was wrong. The saddle girth that snapped was practically new. Finn was an experienced rider. He checked all the equipment himself that morning. But somehow, she wrapped her arms around herself as if warding off a chill. "The police investigation found nothing suspicious," Thorn said carefully, watching her face. "Because they didn't look." The words burst out of her. "Nathan handled everything, the police, the insurance, the press. Said he was protecting me, protecting the family name. But Finn," her voice broke. "Finn tried to talk to me that day, said he had proof of something, needed to show me important documents. But I was busy with a wine-tasting event, told him it could wait until morning." The note in Thorn's pocket seemed to burn against his chest. Not yet, he decided. She wasn't ready. "The stallion was the only witness," Vivian continued, sinking onto an old tack trunk. "By the time we found them, Finn was, and Phantom was gone, ran wild for 3 days before we caught him. He's never been the same, never trusted anyone. Until you." Lightning flashed again, illuminating tears on her cheeks. Thorn handed her his bandana, pretending not to notice as she wiped them away. "Loss changes us," he said quietly. "Changes animals too. Makes us careful about trust." She looked up at him sharply. "You sound like you know." "My wife," he said, the word still difficult after all these years. "Sarah. Car accident 6 years ago. She loved horses. We had a ranch together, bigger than my current place. After she died, I couldn't. Everything there reminded me of her. Sold it all, started over. Found purpose in healing wounded animals instead. Is that why Phantom trusts you?" He recognizes the grief. "Maybe." Thorn sat beside her on the trunk, careful to maintain a small distance. "Or maybe he just knows I understand what it's like to want to run from memories." The storm's fury began to ease, rain softening to a gentle pattern. In the relative quiet, Vivian's next words were crystal clear. "I dream about that night sometimes. About getting to the stable sooner, about listening when Finn said he needed to talk." She turned to face him, green eyes bright with unshed tears. "Do you dream about changing your past?" "Used to," Thorn admitted, "until I realized Sarah would have hated seeing me trapped in that moment. Started focusing on the animals instead. They don't care about your past, they just know if you're present with them here and now." A soft nicker from the shelter drew their attention. Through the tack room window, they could see the stallion had settled, his proud head lowered peacefully. "He's calmer now," Vivian observed, unconsciously leaning slightly against Thorn's shoulder. "Storm's passing." But they both knew he wasn't just talking about the weather. The door creaked open, revealing Zeb with 2 steaming mugs. "Thought you might need coffee," he said, eyes twinkling as he took in their proximity. "Storm's almost over, but the roads are flooded. You should stay tonight, Senor Reed. The old groom's quarters are still furnished." After Zeb left, Vivian stood, smoothing her riding pants with shaking hands. "He's right about the roads. You should stay." Thorn nodded, thinking of the note hidden in his pocket, of Nathan's warning looks, of all the questions still unanswered. "I'll need to check on the stallion through the night anyway." Thorn. She paused at the door. Thank you for understanding about Finn, about everything. Vivian, he called as she turned to leave, when you're ready, there's more to understand about that night. She held his gaze for a long moment, trust warring with fear in her eyes. Finally she nodded. Tomorrow, after the board meeting. We'll talk. As she walked away into the rain-washed evening, Thorn touched the hidden note. Tomorrow would change everything. He just prayed she was strong enough for the truth, and that he was strong enough to protect her from whatever storm was coming next. Morning found Thorn in the renovated shelter, watching the stallion explore its new space. The horse moved with growing confidence, occasionally stopping to press its muzzle against the fresh timber he and Zeb had installed. In the early light, the scars on its flanks from that fatal night were barely visible. The sound of raised voices drew his attention to the main house. Through the window of Vivian's office, he could see her engaged in what appeared to be a heated argument with Nathan. Her brother's face was flushed with anger as he gestured at some papers on her desk. They've been at it since dawn, Zeb said, appearing at Thorn's side with his ever-present coffee. Board meeting today, big decisions about the winter wine releases. He hesitated. Mr. Nathan never liked how Ms. Vivian runs things. Says she's too much like her father, too focused on quality over profit. And Finn? What did he think about the business? Zeb's weathered face darkened. He found things, numbers that didn't match, shipments that disappeared. He tried to tell Ms. Vivian, but the old man crossed himself. The night he died, he came to me, asked me to give her something if anything happened to him. But when I went to get it later, his locker had been cleaned out. Everything gone. The note in Thorn's pocket seemed to grow heavier. He'd spent half the night debating whether to show it to Vivian. Now, watching Nathan storm out of her office, slamming the door hard enough to rattle the windows, he knew he couldn't wait any longer. Zeb, I need you to do something for me. Get Pike and the other old-timers together, the ones who were here when Finn died. Have them ready to talk, really talk, if we need them. The stable manager nodded gravely. It's time, isn't it? Past time. Thorn found Vivian in her office, staring out the window at the vineyards that stretched to the horizon. She didn't turn when he entered, but her shoulders tensed at the sound of his boots on the hardwood floor. Nathan wants to sell the North Vineyard, she said quietly. Says we need to streamline operations. Those vines were my father's pride. Finn used to walk them with me, talking about the future, about the legacy we'd build. Vivian. His voice was gentle but firm. I found something in Finn's old saddle. Now she did turn, her face pale in the morning light. Without a word, Thorn withdrew the weathered note and placed it on her desk. Her hands trembled as she picked it up, eyes scanning the hurried writing. This is his handwriting. Her voice cracked. When did you? Yesterday. There's more. Zeb says Finn tried to get a message to you the night he died, something about the estate's finances, but his locker was cleaned out before Zeb could retrieve it. Vivian sank into her chair, the note clutched to her chest. I should have listened that last day. He kept trying to tell me something was wrong, but I was so busy with the wine tasting, with impressing potential buyers. A bitter laugh escaped her. God, I was such a fool. You weren't the fool, Thorn said quietly. You were the target. Her head snapped up. What? Think about it. Finn was an accountant. He found discrepancies in the books, tried to warn you. Then suddenly his equipment fails during a ride, equipment he'd checked that same morning. Understanding dawned in her eyes, followed quickly by horror. Nathan. He handled all the cleanup, insisted on dealing with the police himself, said I was too distraught. She stood abruptly, moving to a filing cabinet. The insurance papers, Finn's death benefits. Nathan handled those too, but I should have copies. The cabinet drawer stuck. Vivian yanked it harder, and suddenly papers were spilling across the floor. Thorn knelt to help her gather them, but she had gone very still, staring at a thick envelope that had fallen from the back of the drawer. This isn't mine, she whispered. With shaking fingers she broke the seal. Inside was a USB drive and a letter, the paper yellow with age. As Vivian read, all color drained from her face. Without a word, she handed it to Thorn. My dearest Vivian, if you're reading this, I'm probably dead. I know how melodramatic that sounds, but there's no gentle way to say it. I've discovered something terrible about the estate's finances. Millions missing, funneled through fake equipment purchases and phantom wine shipments, all authorized by Nathan. I have proof, shipping manifests, bank transfers, all of it backed up on the enclosed drive. I tried to find the right way to tell you, to protect you from this betrayal. Maybe that was my mistake. By being careful, I lost precious time. Your brother saw me in the office tonight. I don't think he knew what I found, but he suspected. I'm meeting my old forensic accounting partner, Marcus, tomorrow morning. By then it will all be over one way or another. My love, if something happens to me, please remember, check the shipping manifest from March to June. Look at the signatures. And know that every moment with you has been worth any risk. All my love, Finn. March to June, Vivian repeated numbly. Those are the months Nathan insists on handling personally even now. She looked up at Thorne, her eyes bright with unshed tears and something harder, anger. All this time he let me believe, made me think it was just an accident. The office door opened. Nathan stood in the doorway, his face unreadable as he took in the scattered papers, the open envelope, his sister's expression. Board meeting's about to start, he said smoothly, but I see you're otherwise occupied with the help. Don't, Vivian's voice was steel. Don't you dare stand there and pretend. Finn knew, didn't he? Thorne added. About the missing money. About all of it. Something shifted in Nathan's eyes, a predator sensing danger. You're upset, sister. Perhaps we should discuss this privately. Like you discussed things privately with Finn? Thorne stepped forward, positioning himself between the siblings. Before or after you tampered with his saddle? Nathan's mask slipped, just for a moment, revealing a coldness that sent chills down Thorne's spine. You have no idea what you're talking about, Nathan said, his voice steady but with an edge of danger. This is a family matter, Mr. Reed. I suggest you remember you're just an employee here. He's not just an employee, Vivian said, standing taller now, clutching Finn's letter. And this stopped being just a family matter the moment you, her voice caught, but she forced herself to continue, the moment you killed Finn. Nathan's laugh was hollow. Really, Vivian? You're going to trust the word of a drifter and a 4-year-old letter that conveniently appears just as I'm pushing to make necessary business changes? He gestured to the window overlooking the vineyards. This estate is drowning in debt that your sentimentality created. Father would be ashamed. Don't you dare speak about what Father would think, Vivian said, her voice low and dangerous. Not when you've been bleeding his legacy dry for years. We have proof, Thorne added quietly. Finn kept records. And I'm betting Marcus, Finn's accounting partner, is still out there somewhere, isn't he? Something dangerous flashed in Nathan's eyes. He glanced at his watch with deliberate casualness. The board is waiting, Vivian. I suggest you pull yourself together. We can discuss your concerns after the vote on the North Vineyard sale. There won't be a vote, Vivian said, reaching for her phone. I'm calling the police. Nathan moved with unexpected speed, knocking the phone from her hand. Don't be stupid, sister. Who do you think they'll believe? The grief-stricken woman who's been mentally unstable since her fiancé's tragic accident, or the CFO who's kept this estate afloat despite her emotional decisions? Thorne stepped forward, but Nathan had already pulled a small revolver from his jacket pocket. Stay where you are, Mr. Reed. I've worked too hard and too long to let either of you ruin everything now. This won't solve anything, Nathan, Thorne said calmly, though his heart hammered in his chest. Too many people know. Zeb, Pike, the other old-timers, they all suspected something wasn't right about Finn's death. Suspicions aren't evidence, Nathan smiled coldly. And loyal employees can be persuaded to forget their concerns with the right incentives. What's your plan here? Vivian asked, her voice remarkably steady despite the gun pointed in their direction. Shoot us both? That's going to be hard to explain even for you. A knock at the door made them all freeze. Ms. Escher? It was Lyra Winter's voice. Sorry to interrupt, but I'm here for the stallion's follow-up exam. Your assistant said I could find you in your office. Nathan's eyes darted between the door and Vivian. In that moment of distraction, Thorne lunged forward, catching Nathan's wrist and forcing the gun upward. The weapon discharged with a deafening crack, sending plaster raining down from the ceiling. Outside, someone screamed. Feet pounded down the hallway toward the office. Thorne and Nathan struggled, crashing into Vivian's desk. The gun clattered to the floor, spinning away across the hardwood. Vivian dove for it, her hands closing around the grip just as Nathan threw Thorne off and turned toward her. It's over, Nathan, she said quietly, the revolver now aimed steadily at her brother's chest. Her hands didn't shake. All of it. The embezzlement, the lies, Finn's death, all of it. The door burst open. Lyra stood there, wide-eyed, with Zeb and Pike right behind her. Beyond them, board members and estate staff gathered in the hallway, drawn by the sound of the gunshot. Someone call the police, Thorne said, rising slowly to his feet. His shoulder ached where he'd hit the desk, but his eyes never left Nathan. You'll regret this, Nathan hissed at Vivian. Father's legacy will be dragged through the mud. The estate will fail. No, Vivian said firmly. Father's legacy was never about the money. It was about integrity, about doing things the right way. She looked at Thorne, something softening in her gaze. Sometimes what seems broken can be healed if you have the courage to face the truth. 3 months later, the West training yard bustled with activity as the stallion, now answering equally to Phantom and Shadow, pranced proudly around the paddock. His once injured leg showed no sign of weakness as he moved with fluid grace under Thorne's gentle guidance. Vivian watched from the fence, the afternoon sunlight catching the copper highlights in her hair. The estate had changed in the weeks since Nathan's arrest, not just physically with the renewed focus on the historic vineyards, but in spirit. The shadows seemed to have lifted, as if the land itself knew that justice had finally been served. He looks happy, she remarked as Thorne approached, leading the stallion to the gate. You both do. Thorne smiled, removing his work gloves. He's remembering who he was meant to be. Turns out he just needed someone to trust him enough to let him find his way back. A lot like someone else I know, Vivian said softly, reaching out to touch his weathered hand. The gesture was tentative, but it held promise. The investigation into Nathan's crimes had uncovered far more than even Finn had suspected. Not just embezzlement, but wine counterfeiting, tax fraud, and eventually, evidence of tampering with Finn's writing equipment. Marcus, Finn's accounting partner, had come forward with his own records once he heard of Nathan's arrest, completing the puzzle that Finn had started to assemble 4 years ago. How was the board meeting? Thorne asked, releasing the stallion into the larger pasture where he immediately broke into a joyful gallop. Better than expected. The new financial plan was approved unanimously. We'll be focused on quality over quantity, just like my father always wanted. Vivian leaned against the fence, her shoulder brushing his. And I've decided to establish a rescue center for abused and injured horses. With the right expertise running it, of course. Thorne raised an eyebrow. That sounds like a job offer. Maybe. She smiled, the expression reaching her eyes in a way he'd rarely seen before. Or maybe it's just an excuse to keep you around a little longer. Phantom circled back toward them, tossing his head as if in approval. The magnificent stallion that had once been wild with grief now moved with purpose and trust, his dark eyes clear and forward-looking. You know, Thorne said thoughtfully, watching the horse, sometimes the deepest wounds heal the strongest. Vivian's hand found his, her fingers intertwining with his own. I'm beginning to believe that, she whispered. As the sun began to set over the vineyards, casting the valley in shades of gold and amber, 2 broken hearts began to find their rhythm together, their shadows stretching long across the healing earth.